Hello, everyone. Welcome to a very special combined podcast. This is a combination of Living History and our sister podcast, Peter Hart's Military History. I'm Matt McLachlan, and joining me is Peter Hart.
Hi. Well, it's great to be here. And it's so nice to be without Gary and the farting dog. I mean, that just adds a certain tone to this is so much more sophisticated with just you, man.
It does feel like that, doesn't it? It does, it does feel like there's something missing, though. So, I'm sure you'll be looking forward to getting back to recording with Gary as well.
Oh, yes.
For anyone who's confused, my podcast, Matt McLachlan's Living History, hopefully you're subscribing and listening to that. There's also Peter Hart's Military History, normally done in conjunction with his good chum, Gary Bain, and the farting dog, Fred the farting dog. So it's well worth check out both podcasts if you haven't already done so. I wanted to get you, Pete, on the show. We've talked to you a lot lately. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on. But I wanted to get you on the show because it's really exciting this week, because we have mentioned before that in conjunction together, we are publishing a Gallipoli book. You've written an amazing book about the Gallipoli Evacuation, which I have the great fortune to be publishing for you. So Living History, our first book ever. We're going to be book publishers after this. This is our first book. And I just wanted to get you on the show to talk about it as this sort of special bonus episode, because it's done now. You've written the manuscript. You've delivered it. I'm in the process of editing it. It's great so far, I've got to say. Nice work. But I just wanted to have a chat to you about that process of writing this book, because it's not often we get inside the mind of an author at this stage of a book project. It could actually, now that I think about it, that could be a mistake, but we'll tread carefully. About this. We'll tread carefully. But I really just wanted to get you on, Pete, to talk about really the process that led to the book, because I think it's really fascinating. It's great that we've come together to work on this book, and I just wanted to hear a little bit more about it. So let's start. I mean, I know the reason, why you decided to write this book was because I came to you and said, Pete, would you write a book for me? So there is that. But we had a bit of a chat about it, and pretty quickly you settled on the concept of I was saying we should do something on the Gallipoli landing, but you pretty quickly said, no, that's been done to death. Let's focus on the evacuation. What was your reason for thinking the evacuation was something you want to focus on?
Well, it sort of went, the whole process went sort of, first, it had to be First World War, because my if you like, real publisher, the ones I'm contracted to, as opposed to chums with, are directed me firmly to the Second World War. So it had to be First World War. For my personal interest, it had to be Gallipoli. What hasn't been done at Gallipoli? Well, funnily enough, in conversation, we've identified 3 or 4 topics that haven't been done. But the one that really leapt out at me was and I'm not saying no one's ever studied it before, but no one's covered it in detail. And it's also the fact, and I tried to do this in my other books, it's a 2-part story. And in some ways, and this is not what Australians want to hear, in some ways the evacuation of Helles was more touch and go because of the weather. The weather turned nasty. And it's a real drama. All the evacuations are real dramas. You almost find yourself thinking, are they going to get away with this? Or, God, this is a bit tight. And so much could go wrong. And also, I had not previously realised the absolute importance of Brudenell White in developing the overall plan. He was Birdwood's chief of staff with the Anzac Corps, and that's the sort of thing that you think, how many times I knew about this, I knew his name, I knew what he'd done, but I hadn't really hadn't looked at the detail. It's when you dig into things, Matt, that things get exciting. Sometimes detail can be boring, the sort of academic, which unit was where, minor, boring. Ugh. But other detail, how things happen, why they happen, how people feel about what's happening, what people think's going to happen, these are what are interesting to me as a historian, and this book gave me the opportunity to really dig into the evacuation and to sort of get me shovel out and dig down and have a look. And I loved the process. Loved it.
I mean, it shows in the manuscript. I can see your enthusiasm for the subject. I love the fact that you write as you speak, Pete, and I can see that enthusiasm coming through on every page. Just tell me something about the evacuation. Gallipoli has been picked to death. I mean, it wasn't even a very long campaign. And over the last century, it has been dissected and carved up, and every part of it has been dug into and explored and rehashed. We've done everything from the landings to Lone Pine and the Neck and the battles of Krithia and the August Offensive. I mean, Gallipoli has been dissected more than probably just about any other campaign, at least of the First World War. But not the evacuation. The evacuation seems to be a story of self-firing rifles invented by some plucky Aussies in the trenches. You know, a tiny little bit about the storm that hit Gallipoli, but only in the context of, that's what finally convinced them that they had to leave. And then we got away under the nose of Johnny Turk without him even noticing, and aren't we great? That is true, obviously. All those elements are true. But why does the evacuation get overlooked when it's such an important part of the whole story?
Because it's I think partly it's difficult because it when you write in a book, you have a narrative drive. You know this. In whatever book you write, you've got to make sure that you hold the listener. And the story of the evacuation has a very sharp gear change or gear shift. I don't drive a car. I don't know. But, so you have the drama of the first evacuation builds up to a crescendo of Suvla and Anzac. Particularly Anzac is very tight. And then there's a sort of gear change and it goes back and then you have to tell the same story again. And I think that's put authors off. Because it's technically quite difficult to maintain the reader's interest. I think I've managed that because I've done the shift by looking at the diversionary actions fought at Helles after the evacuation of Suvla and Anzac. So although they're taking place contemporaneously, that's a word I shouldn't have tried to say. Although they're taking, I deal with them afterwards, so I have a sort of link that carries the narrative through. It was great fun to write. There is a technical problem there that you have to, and I think I've overcome it. I don't think you'll find the book suffers from it. I think that's put authors off, but I'll tell you something. I'm going to disagree with you now. When you say, and not a serious disagreement, obviously, or I'll be thrown off the podcast. He's a very strict man, Matt. You say his name wrong and he's off. But you say it's been covered, but has it? It's covered up to the end of August. There are 4 more months of the campaign. There's fighting going on at Helles and around Hill 60 and all the way through. There's things like there's even chunks of the battlefield like the Boot, which is to the north of Kirich Tepe, which I'm going to take you to. An amazing area. It's a whole big bit of the battlefield. That bit of the battlefield is probably bigger than Anzac, and yet. We don't know. I know where the lines were. I've been to the trenches. I've looked at the trenches. No one ever goes there, except with me and with Bill Sellers and a couple of other idiots who are willing to go. So there's these gaps in our knowledge, and one of the gaps in our knowledge is a proper understanding of the evacuation as a whole process. And so there's still things to discuss at Gallipoli. And I'm finding the later phases of the campaign increasingly difficult, which is basically where they're trying to cement their position, looking to make small tactical gains. So the fighting goes on. There's just no big attacks. But people are getting killed. The dysentery carries on until late in the winter. There's plenty to talk about at Gallipoli. And, I may even revisit the period in October and November at a later date.
It's a great point, Pete, because when we look at these overall accounts of the Gallipoli campaign, they do seem to come to a bit of a screeching halt after sort of August 21, Battle of Scimitar Hill, Hill 60, the end of the August offensive. And then the rest of it sort of gets summarised as, and then they held their positions for several months and eventually evacuated. So you're right, there is a bit of a black hole in the Gallipoli story about those last 4 months of the campaign.
There's 4 months from April to August, but there's 4 months from August to December. Now, my maths isn't good, so you may pick me up on this, but you see my point. And 90% of books on Gallipoli, including mine, are on the first 50%. So there's plenty to discuss, and the evacuation has sort of fallen into this. Not saying that we don't, people haven't done work on it, because I respect the work of academics and people in the field who have been looking at this.
Pete, just tell me about the evacuation. Was it this amazing achievement like we often talk about it? We talk about it was miraculous how we managed to pull this together. It was incredibly well organised. We got away under the noses of the Turks without them knowing. Was it as great an achievement as we like to think?
Yes. I absolutely think it's an amazing achievement. In November, they had 100. I'm going to go. I've written it down, obviously, or I wouldn't get it right. In November, they had 134,728 men, 393 guns, and 14,587 mules and horses at the combined garrisons of Suvla, Anzac, and Helles. Now, they all had to be got away. You know how? When at Helles, the trenches are a couple of yards apart, up on Gully Spur. At Anzac, they're even closer at a place like Quinns. At Suvla, they're all round you, and you've got 3 or 4 miles to get back. I mean, there's different problems. So at Suvla, you're not so overlooked. You're overlooked, but not so. Not you're not 2 yards away. You're a couple of 100, 300 yards away. But you've got to go back 3 or 4 miles. At Anzac, you're incredibly overlooked. You're only feet away. You've only got to go back quarter of a mile. So there's different problems. At Helles, there's a combination of both. You've got 3 or 4 miles to go back, and in places you're right close together. I keep telling people, Helles is probably the biggest technical problem. There's no beach. The beaches aren't as good in some ways. So You've got all this going on, and how to do it. And the normal plan would be to launch a huge diversionary attack somewhere, possibly a new landing at Bullaire, something like that, to deflect attention away and then sneak off, probably falling back in stages. And this indeed was the plan that several British generals were going for. But Brudenell-White and Birdwood, you've got to give Birdwood the credit as well. People think Birdwood, it's all Brudenell-White. But, of course, who's responsible? They come up with the idea of the secret evacuation. And they're going to hold the front line right to the end. And they're going to rely on a series of ruse de guerres. Or, and of them, the only one we ever hear about, it's a sodding automatic, the rifle, the self-firing rifle, which was a brilliant innovation. Water dripping down, knocking something over to give the jerk to the trigger, and fabulous, great idea. But they only cover you for 30 minutes. That's the longest they reckon, and there weren't that many of them. And the really important thing is that Brudenell-White introduced straight away, before the end of November, before the bloody politicians had agreed anything, because they delayed, he'd introduced the silent periods. And the silent periods are worthy of a book themselves, I think. Basically, you all go quiet. Shh. And even if you see the Turks, you don't fire at them. And you keep this up for as long as it takes, until eventually the Turks come wandering across and you shoot the buggers. Now, that's not nice for those poor Turks, obviously, and we regret the deaths now, looking back. But at the time, what you're doing, it's like Pavlov's dog. You're training the Turks that if it goes quiet and they do anything, they'll get killed. It's a great sort of psychological method. And it's this that I think allows us to get away with it. Because you think picture yourself now as a young Turk. I often picture you as a young Turk, Matt. Gary says some really strange things. But picture yourself, you're in the front line trench, and you've been through one of these. A couple of your mates have been killed, when they were sent to a patrol to investigate a silent period. And there's a silent period on the night at Anzac, on the night of the 19th, 20th of December. And you think it's all gone quiet over there. Do you, A, tell your sergeant and then officer and see what happens? And what will happen? Well, you'll probably be sent into no man's land. Or do you, B, keep bloody quiet? Which would you do? Of course,
you're going to keep quiet. You've seen it night after night. Why would this night be any different?
And the thing is, it's human nature. And people say the Turks must have known. Must they? If you read the correspondence, I don't read Turkish. I don't read German either. I am a really bad historian. But if you read if the correspondence in Harvey Broadbent's books, you know, he's been looking at Turkish archives. If you look at von Sanders's book and Kanengeis's book, they're German officers and staff officers, they didn't know. And I believe them. And so therefore, this scheme created by Brudenell White, signed off by Birdwood, and then signed off by Monroe, the real commander-in-chief of the whole army. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. And it is a brilliant achievement. And just the sheer hard work, the planning, the millions of details, just getting the Navy on board. You know, the Royal Navy, because of course, where they're going without the Navy? You get to the beach, hello.
It's a long walk back to the UK.
A long swim
without the Navy. Pete, in putting all this together, I mean, you know more about Gallipoli than just about anyone, but there must have been something.
No, there's lots of experts.
Okay, you know as much as anyone, but there must have been. Was there something new that you discovered that you hadn't realised about the evacuation during this process?
I hadn't realised quite how bad the great storm was. You know, I'd written about it and I'd got a couple of quotes, but I hadn't delved down into the accounts, and they're chilling. I think we did a podcast on it before, you and I, and some of the accounts are absolutely chilling. Chilling's the wrong word, but it's just the utter misery, the floods, and then the snow and the freezing, and I had not realised how bad it was. I discovered, I found out how bloody irritating the Navy were, and what a spanner they nearly threw in the works by suddenly deciding that they could take the Straits without the army, or just with a simultaneous land attack, which is never going to happen. And they they provide a sort of escape hatch for the politicians. You know, oh, it's all right. We can have a naval attack and everything alone. We don't have to evacuate. And this really holds things up. Again, I hadn't realised how bad. And the rather acerbic chief of staff of Monroe, Lyndon Bell, referred to it as the swan song of the lunatics. Yeah, I bet he was a nice bloke. I've talked to Gary. We were saying, we keep coming across this, how many bad-tempered generals and chief of staff there are.
People can discover that firsthand when they read the book. But
yeah. So that was all, and that was, I hadn't realised just what a spanner in the works the Navy put. I mean, the Navy then performed brilliantly. And they are in many ways they are the senior service, because they may occasionally go a bit off piste like that, but they do, when they get their minds refocused, you know, they perform brilliantly, you know. And the same officers, Weems and Keyes, who are promoting this stupid attack on the Straits, are the people in charge of organising, you know, well, their staff organising, getting all the boats in the right place at the right time. Amazing achievement by the Royal Navy.
Just finally, like all the work that you do, given your nearly 4 decades as an oral historian, a big component of the way you tell this story is in the words of the men that were there. And this book is no exception. I've really been enjoying hearing the men themselves talk about this period of the Gallipoli campaign. Why is it important that we listen to the words of these men and that we tell these stories through the words of the men that were there?
It's crucial. Now, I use oral history, diaries, letters. I use any form of personal experience, and it's crucial. You would not understand what Lyndon Bell was like if you just read, if you don't delve into his correspondence and see what a waspish, bad-tempered bugger he was. That's how you find out. And the reader, you may find it out, but the reader won't find out unless you put the quotes on the page, so that the reader themselves can see what this person is like, because they read what they say. You don't need a historian to filter it, because if you filter it, you remove the thing that he's a waspish, bad-tempered bastard. But that's crucial to understanding who Lyndon Bell was. Monroe, another bad-tempered bugger. If you don't read he's an intellectual general. And if you need that, he came, he saw, he capitulated. No, he came, he analysed, he made a decision, and then he stuck to it because he didn't change his mind without new evidence.
And it was the right decision. I mean, I don't think anyone would argue, looking back, that that was the wrong decision to evacuate Gallipoli. They should have done it months earlier.
If they could. Absolutely. But then again, these men, so you can understand from personal accounts the way these men are, what they're like, why perhaps they've gone that way, those decisions they made. But then, for me, the really important thing is, how does that impact on the lives of the men under their command? And, if you say it was cold, oh, yeah. Well, how does that get across? But if you read or listen to the accounts of the people caught up in the Great Freeze, if I say it was tense on the last night, well, yeah, I'm a bloody historian 105 years later. What do I know? But if you've got the account of the person who was there, and that, sometimes even their writing, especially if they're writing contemporaneous letters or diaries, they actually betray what they're feeling, or not betray. They show what they're feeling, and that for me, I think people say, oh, it's just copying it out. Well, for a start, they're edited so that they're relevant. I mean, that's removal of material, not changing, so they fit the overall narrative. But most of all, that is your evidence. And people say, well, why can't you tell the story? Well, I'd rather let them tell it in their own words. And that's what this book's all about. Telling the story in the words of the men who were there. That's what's important to me. And I think you share that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been loving reading the manuscript, and it's just such an insight into what was going on. So I'm fortunate that I get a bit of a sneak peek of what's coming out. But everyone will be able to read the book themselves when it comes out in early September. You can pre-order the book from about June, and I'm reminding people that if you pre-order the book, there's going to be a very special bonus from Peter Hart, which we won't reveal right now, but we will reveal that in the coming weeks.
It's a secret.
But there will be a special bonus you will get if you pre-order the book before it's released. So we will have full details about that throughout all these channels on websites and social media and everything. So look out for the book, The Gallipoli Evacuation. It's going to be coming out the first week of September. We're so excited. Pete, thank you so much for your contribution. It's a brilliant addition to our knowledge bank of the Gallipoli campaign. And mate, thanks for joining us to talk about it today.
Been an absolute pleasure. I mean, what more fun can you have than talking about Gallipoli? That's what I always say.
Good on you, mate. Thank you.